Good morning and most welcome to 1291. I got a question from my colleague Kalle Lundahl about, is it so that most physicists today deny the reality of consciousness? And I'd say that is my view as well. And part of the reason for that is how knowledge been developing since the 1920s and 30s. And one could say, and this is of course a major simplification, but that there is a hidden bug in thinking or knowledge. And it is impossible to expose that bug by will, arguments, or discussion. It is only a complete understanding that can free the theory or science. And I would say as well as ourselves as human beings. And to the left in red you see some of the reasons, some aspect of the bug, or if you want, bugs, the cosmological fallacies. And I would say at least one of them, that there is only one world, is incredibly hard to grasp. What is the difference in between having initial conditions and classical laws? Does that really mean that there is something outside the universe? Be patient, that understanding will grow on you. But it's there. It is impossible to have those both things. It's a fallacy. It's wrong. And I mention another one because it's quite popular recently. There are a lot of physicists who claim that mathematics is one thing, one method, and it's treated like an entity by itself, and that it has a method. Although it was clearly proven wrong already by Gödel in 1927, this still hangs on. Trademark, of course, but also the previous era of string theory, which is slowly losing its grip on science, but only slowly. And it seems that all the proponents of string theory are willing to give everything up for defending it. And I think this goes to show how dangerous an illusion math as one method is. It's irresistible. It has the promise that you can access infinite information, and or even better put, that you can access a place that's you don't even know where it is, somewhere outside, and have a God's view of everything. This is the promise of mathematics. But it's an empty promise. It will not yield. It will not give you anything. Why? It's an illusion. Math is not one singular thing, coherent. It is not a system that is coherent enough to replace reality. And I think that is a very sharp argument. There are others, but this I definitely think is the sharpest, strongest. It dissolves that type of thinking from the inside. But it needs to be understood, as I pointed out in the second thing. And I can give some pointers. Arithmetic seems healthy enough as to be one whole, but then you have all these stochastic procedures. We went into topology, and very often the different fields of math are in contrast to each other. They do not fit into each other. Just as science, as we earlier, well, much earlier said about the revealment of Paul Feyerabend, science is not one thing. Thermodynamics doesn't fit together with thermodynamics, or hydrodynamics, sorry. So we have already there 3 things that don't fit together: thermodynamics, hydrodynamics, and the classical model of Newton. But more and more things try to go in different direction. Field theory doesn't fit at all. It's a human trait to want that. Or, as I think Smolin is more putting to, the illusion is so tempting, so irresistible, and you can't simply give it up. It is like the illusion of a dinner table will make you choose that one. It looks so grand with a veal, venison, deer, fleshy substances, good wine from heaven, and so on and so on. You can't simply resist it, and you choose that instead of the meaty, fibrous porridge of Lee Smolin. But there is simply only one thing that you should choose, and that is reality. You should never give up experience and say, well, the only price I have to pay is my own experience, or the experience of the world. The sad way that Michio Kaku chose. And then you get stuck, and then you try to stop science. I would say that. I think that is maybe the most telling thing. That's what's happening now, that the proponents of string theory are so aggressive now, so they rather stop science, all of science, than giving up their illusion. But it's a mighty illusion. The more I understand the backsides of mathematics, the more I also understand its greatness. It helps even more for me as a layman to see what mathematics has done to us. It's a mightytude, it's fantastic. But see it as this is helping mathematics. It did not do mathematics justice as Gödel and Hibbert wanted, to make it consistent and coherent. It didn't do justice. It destroyed mathematics. It stalled its development. The transcendental folly is dangerous, but to know its irresistibility, it's the first step. If you acknowledge, oh, I feel tempted by it, I feel it's something I want to go into, then at least you acknowledge that tendency within yourself. And I think that's the first step. Because if you don't find it in yourself, where does this intention come from? You will not be able to put that intention somewhere else. You will still be ruled by it unconsciously. And I think that's the explanation for what these poor string theorists are doing. I had my own bout with string theory. It is tempting, without a doubt. It explains everything. You think. But it doesn't explain anything at all. It actually erodes understanding as such, not only in physics, but your ability to understand things. It's a bug in the understanding. And you will lose your ability to understand the world. You will not be able to make models once you put one model only, and that's enough. No more models are needed to be put into a position outside the universe. One's enough. And then you destroyed knowing capacity. You lost your, so to speak, license to understand knowledge. Because that you cannot do with knowledge. You put a bug into your own knowledge system. So it's very close to computer virus, but it's more fundamental. It is fundamentally wrong to deal with initial conditions and classical laws. Unchanging classical laws is a major fault in thinking by itself, with no need for any empirical evidence. Of course, there won't be any empirical evidence. Yes, it could be, but I don't think in this universe. But it doesn't need empirical evidence, because once you start to reveal what's so wrong with this, then you will understand. It's like trying to lift yourself in your own hair. And then you will start to do that, and you will get this eerie, distant understanding of everything, like everything is far away, not really real. And that position of not being in the world is something shared by so many people today. I don't feel real. I don't have a sense of myself, and I don't think what's around me is real. It's caused by these fallacies and more. It's something that understanding can set free. Understanding can once more bring you to that position of having knowledge in a healthy way, wholesome way. And we can have knowledge of galaxies, stars, things around us, and once more that very delicate and fragile thing, which is abstract thinking, will be strong again. And although models and abstract thinking seem to be almost like nothing today because of this, we give it up. We cannot manage to build big structures anymore, because we lost the how of being. Yes, it is a Heideggerian question. It's the biggest Heideggerian question. It's the question of why. And Smolin shows it is important. And giving up, as I talked about in 1290, qualia. It is giving up reality experience. It's giving up actually what classical physics promised, an understanding of the world, because it also starts with qualia. So it has been sawing off the same branch it was sitting on by this. And this is a happening in knowledge. It is not an ideology, it is not a movement, it is not easily expounded or cleared out. It is in understanding itself. how you understand, not what is inside understanding. The outside grasp is an illusion. It's a nonsensical thing. And I continue now with the second part of the book, A Singular Universe. And as I said before, I am in Smolin's page 370. It's amazing. One problem with the use of symmetry as a route to unification is that we must then explain why the symmetry is broken. This can make the effective laws which appear to govern our universe contingent, as they are consequences of a particular solution which breaks the symmetry spontaneously. The problem of explaining our observed laws is then pushed back to a question of initial conditions, because different solutions may lead to different symmetry breaking patterns. The limit of this line of thought is string theory, which comes in an infinite number of versions depending in part on the symmetry breaking pattern coded into the geometry of the extra compactified dimensions. On the contrary, I will argue below, on the basis of the PII, in a truly fundamental theory, each elementary event will be unique. Our universe should not be seen as a vast collection of elementary events, each simple and identical to the others, but the opposite, a vast set of elementary processes, no two of which are alike in all details. At this level, fundamental principles may be discerned, but there are no general laws in the usual sense. General laws apply to large classes of phenomena which emerge from the fundamental theory only when details which distinguish the elementary events from each others are forgotten in a process of coarse graining. This leads to the understanding that symmetries are always consequences of willed ignorance, which is the result of ignoring small differences between states. For example, in reality, no physical system is translationally invariant, because the universe is complex enough that each and every event has a unique curvature tensor reflecting the influences of distant masses as well as gravitational waves, neither of which can be screened by any physically real material. Another example is the global symmetries of the Standard Model, which are only approximate when the effects of the fermion masses are ignored. To put it in simple terms, the proton is slightly lighter than a neutron. Of course, these and other symmetries hold to very good approximation. The gravitational field is very weak, and the consequence of assuming the proton and the neutron are identical up to the charges are extremely useful for understanding the spectra of nuclei. But there are no unbroken, exact global symmetries. Do listen to this. We also required that the theory of the whole universe be explanatorily closed. This means that chains of explanation and causation do not point back to entities outside the universe. This is, of course, another way to state the requirement that there be no ideal or background elements. Finally, we require that our theory be successful as a scientific theory. To be scientific, a theory must reproduce what is known in its domain. Since the domain is all that exists, that means it must reproduce and explain the successes of the standard models of particle physics and cosmology. But to be judged to have expanded our knowledge, a theory cannot just retrodict, it must predict, and these predictions must be checkable in the near term. The usual and best case is that the predictions be falsifiable by doable experiments or observations not as good as, but acceptable in the short term, are theories which are strongly confirmable. This means that such a theory makes predictions that can be confirmed by doable experiments, such that, were they confirmed, there would be no other plausible explanation other than that this theory is correct. Confirmability is not as good as falsifiable, because there is always a good chance that someone will invent an alternative theory that also plausibly explains the data. One may object that it would be utopian to imagine that we live in the period where cosmology can be completed in agreement with these principles, especially since the study of scientific cosmology is in its infancy. We can expect many steps of progress on a long road to a complete understanding of the universe. It is important then to say that the principles stated here do not require that everything is explained. Chains of explanation and causation may be followed back to a point where we are ignorant of what preceded them. This is no problem so long as the principle of explanatory closure is respected. So where change of causation end due to our ignorance, they end inside the universe. Then there can always be hope that they can be picked up again when observation improves. The most important thing is then not to explain things in a way that precludes further progress. This happens when explanations are built on uncheckable claims about unobservable phenomena, or when change of explanations end in background or ideal elements outside of the dynamical influence. So the principles we have proposed do not insist or imply that science can within a finite time come to answer every question. Rather, they keep the future of science open by keeping high standards for what has been explained. The Newtonian paradigm. We now turn from the goals of a cosmological science to the theories we have available to us. The standard methodology of physics was invented by Newton and frames all the successful physical theories since, including quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and general relativity. It can be described as follows. The system to be studied is always a subsystem of the universe, idealized as an isolated system. The theory appropriate to that subsystem is defined by giving separately the kinematics and the dynamics. The kinematics comes first and is described by giving a state space, C, of possible states the system may have at any moment of time. The dynamics is then given by specifying a law which, given a point of C, gives a unique evolution from that point. The evolution takes place in time, measured in many cases by a clock outside the system. The state space and the law are timeless, while the law evolves the state in time. We will call this the Newtonian paradigm for a dynamical theory. To use this paradigm, one inputs the space of states, the law, and the initial state, and gets as output the state at any later time. This method is extremely powerful and general, as can be seen from the fact that it characterizes not just Newtonian mechanics, but general relativity, quantum mechanics, and field theories. both classical and quantum. It is also the basic framework of computer science and has been used to model biological and social systems. In classical theories, the state space is the phase space given by coordinates and momenta. In quantum theories, it is the Hilbert space. The failure of the Newtonian paradigm when applied to cosmology. Successful as it is, this method cannot be used as the basis for a truly cosmological theory. There are two strong reasons for this. The first is that we want a cosmological theory to answer the questions of why these laws, and also account for the initial conditions of the universe. Since laws and initial conditions are inputs for the method, they cannot be outputs. Much inconclusive work has resulted from attempts to explain the choices of laws and initial conditions, making use implicitly of the Newtonian paradigm. These failures are due to the reliance on a paradigm of explanation that cannot answer the questions we ask of it. Another reason for the Newtonian paradigm cannot be extended to the whole of universe is that its success relies on our ability to cleanly separate the roles of the initial conditions from the laws in explanations of physical phenomena. But this separation in turn relies on our ability to do an experiment many times while varying the initial conditions. Only by making use of the freedom to run an experiment over and over again with different initial conditions can we determine what the laws are. For the laws, code regularities that are invariant under variation of the initial conditions. As you can take from this, we need to run the initial conditions to check the laws. As you see, you can't do that with the cosmological fancy. That is to say, the Newtonian paradigm is ideally structured to be applied to small subsystems of the universe, which can be prepared in many copies. In these cases, the configuration space corresponds to the operational fact that the experimenter has the freedom to prepare the system in any initial state in C. In cosmology, we do not have this freedom, both because there is only one system with one history, and because we are not there at its origin to choose the initial conditions. So when we attempt to extend the Newtonian paradigm to the universe as a whole, we take it outside of the domain where its logic and structure tightly fit the experimental methodology. In usual applications of the Newtonian paradigm, we are seeking to verify a hypothesis about the dynamical law which applies to the subsystem. To do so, we prepare the subsystem many times, varying the initial conditions, and we seek to verify whether the law applies in all these cases. What we mean by a general law is a feature of or invariant of motion which is unaffected by varying the initial conditions. When we take this method out of its domain of validity and attempt to apply it to cosmology, several things goes wrong. One is that we only get one try, so it's not clear what meaning a general law has in this context. A second is that we have to test simultaneously hypotheses as to the choice of initial conditions and hypotheses as to the choice of laws. This can lead to degeneracies in which the same data set can be explained by different choices of laws and initial conditions that cannot be resolved by doing experiments with more cases, because there is only one case. This lessens the predictive or postdictive power of the scheme. On the other hand, to limit the application of a theory expressed in the Newtonian paradigm to a subsystem of the universe is to make a necessary approximation, because interactions between the subsystem and degrees of freedom outside of its boundaries are neglected. Any model of a subsystem by means of the Newtonian paradigm is then necessarily a truncation of a more exact description. This is captured by the notion of an effective theory, which is a version of the Newtonian paradigm, with limits on its regime of validity spelled out explicitly. Newtonian mechanics, ordinary quantum mechanics, and all known quantum field theories, including the Standard Model, are all understood to be sensible only when thought of as effective theories. There is also good reason to suspect that general relativity also is an effective theory. An exact theory can only be obtained by extending the description to include all the degrees of freedom a subsystem interacts with, which means to the universe as a whole. The question is then whether that more exact cosmological description is to be formulated within the Newtonian paradigm or within a new, presently unknown paradigm. If one presumes the cosmological theory falls within the Newtonian paradigm, then, however, we run into all the failures of the explanation just discussed. The failure to answer queries about the choices of state space, laws, and initial conditions, as well as the degeneracies arising from the inability to probe experimentally the separation in the role of initial conditions and laws. Thus, the result of extending a theory formulated within the Newtonian paradigm to the universe as a whole is to strongly decrease rather than increase the empirical adequacy of the theory. This can be called the cosmological dilemma. This dilemma can be formulated also as follows. A general law gets its empirical confirmation from its applicability to many cases. But by definition, if there are many cases a law applies to, each is a small subsystem of the universe. Each application is then necessarily approximate because of the truncation which removes the influence of interactions between degrees of freedom in the subsystem and degrees of freedom in the rest of the universe. To make the application of the law more exact, one can seek to expand the subsystem to include interactions with and dynamics of an increasingly larger set of degrees of freedom. The limit of this is to include all the degrees of freedom in the universe, but at that point there is only one case and one run of each measurement, so the operational context which defined the notion of a general law no longer applies. This dilemma has teeth because there are questions about phenomena on the level of the universe as a whole, which cannot be formulated as a question about a great many subsystems. These include questions about background structures such as the geometry of space, space-time or the state space, or the adequacy of grounding observables on fixed reference systems. This also includes questions about the choice of laws and initial conditions. To resolve the dilemma, we need a new methodology which transcends the limitations of the Newtonian paradigm and will be uniquely suited to address questions about the unique universe. if we instead ignore the cosmological dilemma and seek to apply the Newtonian paradigm to the universe as a whole, we find ourselves trapped in fallacious reasoning. Got a knock on the door. Fallacious reasoning. We can call the taking of the methodology of the Newtonian paradigm outside of its domain of validity, where it corresponds to experimental procedure, the cosmological fallacy. The consequences of committing this fallacy are easily observed in the many puzzles and paradoxes which fill the literature of contemporary cosmological theory. And I feel that there is a question popping up in you listening here. What is the importance of this question? You might say, I am not so interested in cosmology. Or the stars are one thing and we are another. Well, today, the most important theory or understanding is cosmology. It is what tells us what the nature of reality is. So if we have understood this, see it like this, when the cosmological idea of initial conditions establishes, it will tell us what is the universe. And that is calling the shots in all questions. It is the tent or the roof of everything. Everything is going to be contained in this understanding and tell the limits. The more we investigate the universe, the more we are struck by its outmost meaninglessness. This was coming not in those exact words from the recently deceased Steven Weinberg. Sorry, I said put him alive before in a previous lecture, to be corrected now. But what the world is it a senseless, deterministic, soulless, because the question of consciousness do come in here, and there is no chance of consciousness in once you've gone this way. No chance at all. You cannot be in this and come to consciousness. It is blocked out because of the fallacies. By setting the initial conditions, consciousness is blocked out, and determinism, there is no free will. And after that, all the answers follows by necessity. Why we might believe in this modern world, the world is senseless, makes no meaning, comes from this roof and it seeps down everywhere. No one is outside of this knowing. No one. And although underneath here, on the bottom level, well under the roof, we are having discussions about meaning of life and soul, God and everything. It doesn't matter as long as the roof is set. When the roof is set, there can be no consciousness. And since the roof is up here in thinking or in understanding, attacking the roof and say there must be, I think it was Frankel who said, life have to have meaning. You're actually lying. You're actually lying. You're being here. This needs to be addressed and understood. Having arguments down here when the roof is set, that the universe started with a big bang and ended with a big crunch, or will end with a big crunch, and that in between there is no time, that will lead to the many world system, inevitably. And this is also the reason I earlier mentioned Michio Kaku and the League of String Theorists. That's why they're stuck here. They're under the roof. They are already used to a diet that doesn't give them any knowledge. Because transcendental worlds and transcendental strings doesn't give you any knowledge. Of course not. They cannot be experienced. They are, so to speak, outside experience. Smolin is showing that nothing really can be outside of experience. And it's not okay with one exception. And that is initial conditions and eternal laws. There cannot be any exceptions. You cannot say, oh, that's the only exception. It's a bit like saying, I'm a good man, I committed only one little murder, that's it. This is a mass suicide. So it's nothing to joke about, but it's grave. It has caused a lot of harm. But until this understanding is possible, we will have to be here. So, I can just give an example. All those philosophers today who recently, for good grounds, changed opinion, they are no longer stern reductionists. They came into panpsychism. The ideas of Platinga, for instance, that there is a godlike thing in the material substances. I would say that is still here, without a doubt. And that negotiation, which is to make the world's panpsychist, is not gaining anything. It is trying to save what's left of this. That I would say. They have thought carefully and they see that there are some paradoxes. And maybe it's a gut feeling, it can't be right. It can't be right, as Daniel Dennett say, that he doesn't exist, or none of us does. So from that standpoint, we get pushed into panpsychism. You see what I'm getting to? All those discussions are under the roof, where things are already covered. by cosmology. Yes, cosmology calls the shot. It tells us what the world is about. There is no incident that the founder of Big Bang Theory got so awarded and even was having an audience by the Pope. Pope invited him and celebrated him, gave him a sort of honorary reward. This is what, once we know what the world is about, everything will be fall in place as senseless and meaningless. And Smolin sees the price for that. We live thereby in unreality. The world becomes unreal to us, ghost-like, and living without time, it is actually no living at all, because everything comes into time. Also the objects, nothing can exist without time, and pushing time away and putting it way out, it causes havoc to the system. So cosmology is important in this aspect. It drizzles down everywhere. I would say even the smallest child, well, not the very, very smallest, but at least from 5 or 6 years old would know it by now. The same way the original version of this, the Newtonian paradigm, sort of simpered down already in the late 18th century. And this is evident when it came to the turn of the century that followed, how desperation seeped under. This is just incredibly interesting. It is a hidden bug in thinking. Can it be any more interesting? I don't know. Okay, thank you for your patience. Have a very pleasant afternoon. See you next. Bye.